When it comes to the Belleville or Spring Washers, they're very similar to the conventional washer that you might find at home. They can come in different diameters, different hole sizes in the centre, and they can be manufactured out of different gauges, which is the thickness of material. Obviously the thickness of the metal used will obviously alter, the compression force that you can apply to them for them to spring up and down. The compression force on them can also be altered by doubling them up. So if you were to get 2 or 3 and place the cones on top of each other, then this will double the force or triple the force required to press them down, etc. The disadvantage being that the amount of movement is still the same, and on these it's very limited comparison to your conventional coil spring. If you see them on this piston here, you can see how they're stacked. These are just stacked in pairs back to back. Now, the main issue that we've found with regulators and problems with regulators when using these washers, if you look at this shape and the edges, how they sit on top of each other, because it's sort of a cone sitting on a cone, if they don't line up perfectly every single time and they move about a bit, you can end up with a different pressure reading. And so it's important, if you're making your own regulator, that the spool size that they fit on is correct, and also that the bore of the piston that you're putting them down is correct, and so that they won't move about too much. If they're on there, they line up fairly well and there's not much wobble. There has to be enough for them to move about a little bit, because obviously the outside diameter and the inside diameter of the washer alters when it presses up and down. So it can't be a tight fit into the hole, and it can't be a tight fit on the stem. But if it's too loose, like say on this part of the stem here, as you can hopefully see, when the stack goes back together, if you press on it, look, you can have them at all sorts of angles, and this wouldn't give a very good pressure reading if that kept moving about. So it is very important with the Belleville washers that you do get the correct dimensions for them to line up. I have on occasions seen far more expensive and better versions of the washer, and that is where the whole surface is polished, but the top edge here and the bottom edge, this has been held flat on a magnetic grinding bed, and a grind has been passed over, and you've ended up with a small flat on the top and a small flat on the bottom, and so that then when they're stacked together they mate up far better. If you're wondering why this often isn't the case with the Bellevilles that are used in Airgun Regulators, is because these washers are actually quite expensive really for what they appear to be. The polished ones that I've seen with the ground tops and bottoms have been up to £1 each, depending on what material they're in. So if you're going to put a regulator together and you're going to use between 10 and 20 of the washers, you're looking at a very high price before you've even started on the job. So they tend not to be used. People tend to try and stick to these conventional ones. Now there's do's and don'ts with these washers, so if you're going to build your own regulator, I'll just mention a couple of those, and that will hopefully help you. This is a body out of the old BSA cigar regulator, and normally the spring fits in it and it's quite a loose fit, but because this is a one-piece unit and the ends are ground off flat and the piston's also square that goes in, it doesn't really matter that that's a really loose fit. However, if you were going to make a regulator along the same lines and you were just hoping to get a set of spring washers, pop them in the hole and then put your piston in on top of them, this could lead to a bit of a disaster, because as I mentioned, these really need to be guided both outside and inside. So if you're going to make a regulator like this, I would advise that you make yourself some form of central telescopic spool to hold the Belleville washers in place, so that when the piston goes up and down, the washers don't move about, otherwise you could end up with inconsistent readings. The other thing with these types of Belleville washers, again, relates to this being able to move about in the stack. If you've got a gun with like a buddy bottle like the BSA or a Theoban, or a gun that you're going to let the air out of at some point, if these washers are in a stack or in a situation where they could possibly move if the pressure is removed, then if they do move about, if the gun gets knocked or the regulator gets jiggled whilst the gun's in pieces, then it's liable not to give you the same pressure reading when you reassemble it and refill the gun with gas. So these washers need to really be under some form of compression. The best example of this I shall show you now. This pitch here is a pitch I've downloaded from the internet of a Ben Taylor regulator for the rapid range, and this is a very good solution to the problem with the Belleville washers in regards to them being able to move about, especially if the pressure is removed from the chamber, so they're under no compressive force, because obviously on the rapid, once you take the bottle off of this end, the chamber in here, the air has also gone in there, and so on a sort of conventional design, you know, and the piston moves about, when there's no pressure in there, these washers can move about. And so this problem is overcome by having a limited movement on the piston in here, but more movement via this nut and the compression on the Belleville washers at this end, so that when the air is removed from the chamber, when the bottle is taken off, these washers still stay under compressive force and aren't liable to move and give a different pressure reading when the bottle is reattached and the chamber is repressurized. And this is the same on the regulator that they supply to fit into other air rifles, you know, more conventional air rifles. It's of the same design, and so these Belleville washers are on a good internal pin of the right size in here, so this pin's the right size, and then they're constantly kept under the compressive force by this nut. And so this is a very good design for the use of Belleville washers, and if you're going to design and manufacture your own regulator for your own air rifle, then you need to think about trying to keep the Bellevilles under a constant compressive force. So to summarise, there's fors and againsts for both the conventional circular section coiled compression spring and the spring washer, Belleville Spring Washer. The fors with the Belleville Spring Washer are the fact that you can manufacture yourself a far smaller regulator. So if you're limited by air cylinder size, then that can be a good thing, because you'll get more shots out of it because it takes up less volume than the conventional spring. And you can also make a regulator that will work at much higher pressures than a conventional spring, because the washers can be stacked to give a higher force required to move the piston. On the negative for the Belleville Spring Washers, if they're not under some form of compression tension all the time, then if the air ever lets out of your gun, they might move and give a different pressure reading next time. And also, because there's quite a stack of them, the wear and tear can also sometimes lead to pressure alterations, and it's not as easy to service or adjust the pressure yourself if you're making one or you've purchased one off somebody else. Where with the conventional spring, it's easier to service, very robust, got a good longevity, doesn't suffer from wear and tear quite so much because the spring travel is further, and so any wear and tear that appears in the seat doesn't seem to make such a difference in the pressure output, and it can be easier to adjust because the piston moves further, there's more travel, and so the adjustment can be made a little bit finer on the adjustment screw for someone who's fitting one themselves. But on the whole, there isn't a great deal of difference between the two. I'd say that if you've got money to spend and you're going to have, you're not planning on doing the job yourself, and you don't mind sending the regulator back to somebody else to be serviced in a year or two's time, and you want to get absolutely every shot you possibly can, then probably go for the Belleville Spring Washers. If it's an item that you want to fit, service and adjust yourself over years to come, then maybe go for the conventional compression coil spring. It'll give you a couple less shots, but on the whole, if it's a fairly big reservoir, there's very little between the two. So I hope that has been somewhat of a guide towards the two different methods which are used in most airgun regulators today.